How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Yomi Daf 23 of Masechta Zevachim. Friends. Okay. Daf Yomi, the big sugya on Daf Yomi is the sugya of a tamei, of a kohen who's tamei, doing avodah in the base hamiqdash. We had said in our Mishnah, I believe, what daf was that? Yeah, so in our Mishnah we have tamei. There you go. So we're gonna, of course, our Mishnah was the Mishnah Daf Tezvav Amud Beis. The first Mishnah of the second parak was called Azvachim Shekibu Daman Onein Tvuyo Mechus Kippurim Mechus Begadim Shlovach Chazam Regayim Ariel Tamei Yoshev Omed, etc., etc., etc. Today we are going to tackle Tamei and Yoshev. That is the plan for today. The big bulk of today's daf is going to be the sugya of Tamei. That, of course, as you can imagine, Tumah tends to be a complex sugya, so that is going to be the bulk of today's daf, which is why I also, we have some work to do on Daf Chav Beis Amud Beis, because it's all just kind of one sugya. So that's going to be the big bulk of today's daf. So it's a tamei kohen working in the base hamiqdash. And then secondly, a sitting kohen working in the beit hamiqdash. That's really going to come up at the end of the daf, and it's a much shorter sugya, and we're just going to kind of tackle that pretty quickly and move on to the next sugya tomorrow. So, friends, that is what we have in store for Daf Chav Gimel of Masechta Zevachim. Let us jump in. All right, friends, we're going to start on Daf Chav Beis Amud Beis at the two dots, really about halfway through the Amud, where it says tamei pasul. You got it? Good. Amu ziknei darim. Oh, this is the ziknei darim. They say the elders of the south. They say so. Now the honestly understanding that's probably going to be like I'd say the big task of today's daf is going to be back and forth, thising and thatting with the opinion of the ziknei darim, and here is their opinion. The elders of the south said, "Lo shanu ela tamei sheretz, avol tamei meis mitoch shematza betzibor miratze nami biyachid." Yeah. This is tumentara. Yep, tumentara. Right, tzibor yachid. So says the elders of the south, the ziknei darim, that when our Mishnah says that a kohen, this talk very interesting, friends, that a kohen who does a vote in the beit hamiqdash when he's tamei, so then the avoda is psula, it's mechulel, it's no good. So what are we talking about? What a kohen is tamei for? Because we know that, right, a kohen who's tamei, who's, let's say, doing a korban tamid, right, a korban tzibor, to muhutra b'tzibor. Right, it would not be possible. So, in what scenario is a kohen who's tamei doing the avoda and it's possible? So, says the ziknei darim, the elders of the south, that it's talking about where the kohen is tamei with tumas sheretz, that the kohen touched the sheretz. And he came in contact with a dead sheretz, and now he's tamei from a dead sheretz, and now he's doing avodah in the beit hamiqdash. He's offering korbanos and touching korbanos and all that kind of stuff. So in that case, the avodah is mechula. It's no good, and that's what our Mishnah is talking about. You have a kohen who's tamei with tumas sheretz. If he does avodah in the beit hamiqdash, the avodah will be no good. It will be mechula. Again, Amuzik Nedarim, the elders of the south said, Lo shanu ela tamei sheretz. If you have a kohen who's tamei tumas sheretz, and he does avodah in the beit hamiqdash, the Mishnah is saying it's no good. Avo tamei meis, but if we're talking about a tamei meis, right? So if you have a kohen who is tamei tumas hameis, okay, so he came in, you have a kohen who came in contact with the corpse, and now he's doing avodah in the beit hamiqdash. So actually, the avodah will not be pasul. The lichatchila you shouldn't do it, but b'di'evid, the avoda would be ksher. Mitoch shemiratze b'tzibur, because since tuma is hutra b'tzibur when it comes to tumas hameis, miratze nam b'yachid is also miratze b'yachid. Well, wow, there's a lot to explain here. Well, so first of all, what does that mean? Mitoch shehutra mitoch shemiratze b'tzibur miratze nam b'yachid. What does miratze b'tzibur mean? Well, for example, korban paisach. Korban Pesach, this was a big sugya in Masechta Pesachim. Korban Pesach. What happens, right? So individuals, of course, right? An individual who's tamei, so and comes Pesach time, so an individual would not offer a Korban Pesach. Instead, they would wait till Pesach Sheni a month later. However, if the majority of the congregation was tamei, was tamei, so then we would not say that the whole congregation, that the majority, that all these people would wait a month until Pesach Sheni. Instead, if the majority, I believe it's the majority, if the majority of the tzibur is tamei, so you know what, tuma hutra b'tzibur, and you know what, you could mamish bring the korban Pesach as if everybody was tahor. It's mutter, it's mamish mutter. So if the entire tzibur or majority of the tzibur is tamei, so just bring the Korban Pesach normally. Now the question is, what tumah are we talking about? So the pasuk in the context of tumah by Korban Pesach says, "Ish kiyeh tamei lo nefesh." Tumah sameis. We're talking about tumah sameis, not tumah sasheretz. Tumah sasheretz is a different story. We're going to get into more detail soon about that. We're talking about tumah sameis. If the majority of Am Yisrael was tamei tumas hameis, so instead of the majority of Am Yisrael waiting a month until Pesach Sheni, they will all simply bring the korban tumah hutra b'tzibur. They'll bring the korban Pesach regularly in the 14th of Nisan. Masha'ein kain by tumas sheretz. If the majority of the congregation was tummy from a sheretz, then we would not say tumah hutra b'tzibur. The question is, what do you do? But anyways, we don't say that the majority of the congregation, right? Again, the majority of the congregation is tummy tumah sheretz. We won't say that they can just bring the korban Pesach normally as if everybody was Torah. We don't say that by tumas sheretz, but we do say that by tumas hameis, and therefore, since by tumas hameis it's hutra b'tzibur, says the Ziknei Darum. So even if you have a kohen, and the kohen is tamei tumas hameis, and he does the avodah at the beit hamiqdash, the avodah will not be mechulol, because since tumas hameis is something that conceptually has a heter b'tzibur, we could say that it's mutter by a kohen who's tamei tumas hameis and does the avodah in the beit hamiqdash. How come? Why? I mean, it's very nice that tumas hutra b'tzibur, but why does that mean that a kohen who's tamei can do avodah in the beit hamiqdash? He's still tamei, right? And he's an individual, he's not a tzibur, because there is, of course, the concept of the tzitz being meratzeh, that the kohen gadol would wear a tzitz on his forehead. It was this golden plate that said, what was it, Kodesh LaHashem? I feel like I sometimes forget. I feel like in my mind it says Kodesh LaHashem, but I don't. I feel like in practice maybe it says something close to that, but not exactly that. I don't remember. And the tzitz would be meratzeh for tumas hakodshim. And so what we want to say is that specifically when it comes to tumas hameis, since tumas hameis is a tumah that's hutra b'tzibur, so when you have an individual kohen who's offering a korban and he's tamei tumas hameis, b'di'eved, I don't think this would be the lechatchila, b'di'eved, we could say that the tzitz will be meratzeh for the avodah of that kohen who did the avodah b'tumas hameis. Tumas sheretz, on the other hand, is a different story. Since we don't have a concept of tumah hutra b'tzibur when it comes to tumas sheretz, so therefore an individual. So when our Mishnah says that a kohen who does the avodah in the beit hamikdash and he's tamei, so the avodah is mechulol, it's no good. What's that talking about? It's not talking about he's tamei tumas hameis. It's talking about he's tamei tumas sheretz. That is the opinion of the Ziknei Darim. So again, Amu Ziknei Darim, the elders of the south said, Lishanu Ela Tamei Sheretz. That our Mishnah that says that a kohen who does avodah in the beit hamiqdash and he's tamei, the avodah is mechula, that's talking about a kohen who's tamei tumas sheretz. Aval tamei meis. But if we're talking about a kohen who's tamei tumas hameis, the avodah will not be mechulal mitoch shemiratze betzibur, since tumas hameis conceptually is mutter betzibur when it comes to korban pesach. Miratze nami biyachad. So even an individual kohen who does the avodah with tum and he's tamei tumas hameis will say that tzitz is miratze there, and the avodah is kosher, I would imagine, b'di'evid. Ihochi tamei sheretz nami leisi bakal v'choimer. The Gemara asks now, but 1 second. If we're going to say that a kohen who's tamei tumas hameis, the avodah is kshera, well, I should say that kal v'chomer then, the avodah b'tumas hasheretz should be permitted. After all, tumas hameis is a more stringent tumah. You tumah for a week. You need to have hazoas, mechatos, paraduma on day 3, day 7. It's a pretty strict situation. And we're saying yet, a kohen who is tamei with tumas hameis and does avodah in the beit hamiqdash, the avodah is ksheira. So of course, a lesser severity of tumas sheretz should be mutter. Well, should be kosher. Right, so again, if so, tamei sheretz nami, we should say is mutter. Leisi b'kav v'chomer mitmei meis. Ma tmei meis sheton hazoya shlishi v'shvi miratze. If tumas hameis, which is more stringent, and that's you need sprinkling of the efer parah aduma, the may efer parah aduma on day 3, day 7 of the tumah, and yet a kohen who's tamei with tumas hameis, the avodah is kshera. So tamei sheretz she'enu to nazoy gimel v'shvi. So a tamei sheretz, who it's an easy tumah, a 1-day tumah, you're told by the night. Doesn't require sprinkling on day 3 and day 7. Eino din shemiratze. So then certainly the avodah of a kohen who's tamei tumas sheretz, of course, should be keshera. Well, kasave ziknei darin mechaprin kimiskapin. The elders of the south hold that the mechaprim, the kohanim, who are mechaper, are like the miskaprin, the people, the regular people, the people who are getting the atonement, who are receiving atonement. Ma miskaprin tmei in tmei sheretz loy. Just like those who are receiving the kapara, they are, but there's a concept of tumah hotru b'tzibur by tmei meis, not by tmei sheretz. So af mechaprin. So we're going to say the same concept by the kohanim who are atoning tmei meis in tmei sheretz lo. Only tmei meis is if they do the avodah in their tamei tumas hameis, it's going to be kosher. But if they do the avodah the tamei tumas sheretz, it won't be kosher. Tamei sheretz lo. Now continues the Gemara, Maika Sabri. Let's drill down deeper into the position of the Ziknei Darim. What do they hold? Ika Sabri ein shochatin v'zarkin al tmei sheretz amad lo abdei tzibur b'tumah hakol shebiyachid nidchet tzibur avdei b'tumah ela kasabri shochatin v'zarkin al tmei sheretz. This is a very interesting question. So we say, so let's drill deeper dig deeper into the opinion of the Ziknei Darim. What do they hold? I want to read it inside again. If they hold that we don't slaughter and do Zukas Adam for a Tmei Sheretz. Okay, what does this mean? Anybody want to explain? Anybody want to give it a shot? Janine, we haven't heard from you. Janine, you want to explain this to us? So imagine you think you're Korban Pesach, right? Korban Pesach. It's the 14th day of Nisan. It's Yud Daled Nisan. And you are tamei tumas sheretz. There was a dead mouse in the house, whatever, you touched it, whatever it might be. So now the question is, okay, now you're tamei. It's Erev Pesach. You are tamei. You already have your Korban Pesach lined up. You got all your friends. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be a great time. You just touched the dead mouse. You're tamei. The thing is, it's an in and out tuma. You know, you touch the dead mouse. You tamei till the nighttime. Hop in the mikvah. You'll be a tvul yom till the end of the day. You're not eating Korban Pesach until it's the afikomen. It's well into the night. The Korban Pesach. By that time, you're going to be tahor. So the question is, if on Yud Daled, if on Erev Pesach, when you're slaughtering and with shochatin v'zorkin, the Korban Pesach, so right now, the person is tamei. But by the time it comes to eating the Korban Pesach, they'll be tahor. They could eat with everybody else. So the question is, what do you do in that scenario? Right now, they're tamei, but by the time it comes to game time, they'll be tahor. So this is the shaila. Can they be part of the Korban Pesach on the 14th of Nisan or not? So we're saying, my kasavri, so what are they hold? Ikasavri ain shochatim v'zorkin al tamei sheretz. If the Ziknei Darim hold, no, I'm sorry, I do recognize that by game time, by tonight, time for the afikomen, you'll already be tahor. Fact of the matter is, right now, you are tamei. And therefore you can't participate in the Korban Pesach today. Okay, fine, so I'll have to bring Pesach Sheni. But Amayla have the B'tzibur B'tuma. But if that's the case, though, if the Ziknei Darim hold that tamei sheretzes cannot participate in the Korban Pesach, well then, guess what? Then we would say Tuma Hutra B'tzibur by tamei sheretz Hakol Shabiyah. This was a sugya from Masechta Pesachim, as I'm sure everybody at Babble on Talmud remembers, right? Kol Shabiyachid Nidche. Any scenario of Tuma where an individual would be pushed off, and if we're saying, meaning to Pesach Sheni, if we're saying that a tamei sheretz is such an example, right? Tumas hameis, for example. But if we're saying tamei sheretz would be the same thing, you would not offer it b'tumah. You'd have to wait for Pesach Sheni. Avdei tzibur b'tumah. Well, it's those scenarios where we say that, and if the majority of the congregation is tamei, well, they could just do it b'tumah. So if that's the case, so then, just like tumas hameis would be mutter b'tzibur, tumas hasheretz would be mutter b'tzibur, and just like we have the argument by tumas hameis to say that the kohen could do it b'tumas hameis, then you should have the same argument by tumas hasheretz to say that since tumas hasheretz is mutter b'tzibur, a kohen who's tamei can tamei sheretz can also do the avoda. So like ksav shochtim v'zorkin al tamei sheretz, rather the Ziknei Darim hold that we can. This is important. They hold that we can include somebody in the Korban Pesach who's tamei tumas sheretz, i.e. a one-day tumah. The same would apply to a tamei mace on day 7 of his tumah, when also by that night it'll be all over. Basically, a person who has a one-day tumah, the Ziknei Darim hold that they can be included in the Korban Pesach, and therefore, since a tamei sheretz can be included in the Korban Pesach, well then we say that it's not permitted b'tzibur, and that is why they hold that a kohen who's tamei sheretz. That is what the Mishnah is talking about when the Mishnah says that a kohen who's tamei cannot do the avodah in beit hamiqdash, and if he does, the avodah is mechulal, is possible. It's talking about somebody who's tamei tumas sheretz, because since it's not permitted b'tzibur, it's also, since it is not permitted b'tzibur, it's also not permitted by a individual kohen to do the avoda, and we compare the michaprin to the miskaprin, just like the tzibor, it would not be mutter b'sheretz. So also the individual, the kohen who is being michaper, is not going to be mutter b'sheretz, and the avodah will be michulu. Omar Ula says Ula. Takalu v'shlakish li diromoy. Says Ula that Rish Lakish, there's different gears that says the Reish Kalusa gave a hard time to the southerners, to the Ziknei Darim. They said, one second. What is the stronger koach to override Tuma? Koach michaprin or koach miskaprin? Have omer koach miskaprin. Which the michaprim, the kohanim, or the miskaprin, the tzibor, which of them is in this as the stronger position to override tuma? The miskaprin, the tzibor. How come? Uma b'makom shenitmu bailim b'sheretz mishalchin korban. Well, because, for example, we had just said that if you have, shochatim v'zorkin al tamei sheretz, right? We had just said, according to the Ziknei Darim, shochatim v'zorkin al tamei sheretz, that if you have a person who's tamei tumas sheretz, he can be part of the korban pesach, no problem. And yet they said that a kohen who is tamei tumas sheretz cannot do the avodah, and if he does, it's michal, right? So you have the michaper and you have the miskaper. So the miskaper, even though he's tamei tumas sheretz, he could still, right? He could show. He sends it with a messenger, and somebody else is gonna offer it for him. He's not going to be part of the avodah, of offering the korban, because he's going to be tamei tumas sheretz. But he could shulchan, he could send it and have others slaughter it for him. And yet we said that a kohen who's tamei tumas sheretz cannot. So the miskaper is kind of in a stronger position to override tuma and to be able to offer a korban in a state of tuma, more so than the kohen who's not allowed to do the avodah when he's in a state of tumas sheretz. So again, which is the stronger koach to override tuma? Koach michaprin or koach miskaprin? The koach of the michaper, the kohen, or the miskaprin, the bailim, the owner of the korban. Have omer koach miskaprin, the bailim, the owner of the korban. Umabimakum shenitmu bailim b'sheretz mishalchin korban usein. So if you have somebody who's tamei tumas sheretz, he can nonetheless send his korban to be slaughtered, right? If we're talking about korban pesach, so he can be part of a chabura. Just the other people in the chabura will slaughter the korban pesach, and take care of all that stuff, the shchita and the zrika and all that stuff, and he'll just join that night for afikomen. Kohen shenitma b'sheretz eino miratze, and if we're talking about a kohen who's tamei tumas sheretz, he can't do the avodah. If he does, it's mechulel, it's no good. So therefore, I would make the argument, friends. You ready? Makom shenitmu bailim b'meis she'ein mishalchin korban osein. When it comes to tumas hameis, if you have somebody who's tamei tumas hameis, a 7-day tumah, he's on day 2 of 7-day tumah, let's say, he can't participate in the korban pesach, because comes time for the afikomen, he's still going to be tamei for another 5 days. So if the bailim in this case, when we're talking about tumas hameis, cannot participate in the korban pesach, I would say for sure then kohen shenitma memes eno din she'eno miratze. I will then make the argument then that a kohen who's tamei tumas hameis should be unable to do the avodah in the beit hamiqdash. You hear the question? That according to the Ziknei Darim, they had said that a kohen who's tamei tumas hameis, if he does the avodah in the beit hamiqdash, it's kosher. Because since it's mutter by betzibur, so we'll say the tzitzis matzah for a kohen when it comes to tumas hameis. So it's kosher b'diavad. And yet tumas hasheretz, they said, if the kohen is tamei tumas sheretz, the avodah is psula. It's mechulel. And yet they also said, though, that somebody who's tamei sheretz can be part of the Korban Pesach. He's allowed to be part of the Korban Pesach. So now I'll make a kal v'chomer then and say that if you have a situation where you have somebody who is tamei tumas sheretz and he's allowed to participate in the Korban Pesach, and yet a kohen who's tamei tumas sheretz cannot do the avoda, so I'll make the argument that if you have somebody who's tamei tumas hameis and they are not allowed to participate in the Korban Pesach because they're not going to be able to eat it that night, so certainly a kohen should not be able to do the avoda in a state of tumas hameis, and if he does, it should be mechulel, just like a sheretz. Right? So again, makom shenitmu bailim b'sheretz mishalchin korban osein kohen shenitmu b'sheretz einu meratze. If you have the bailim or tamei tumas sheretz, they can nonetheless be part of the Korban Pesach, and yet a kohen who's tamei b'sheretz cannot do the avoda. So makom shenitmu bailim b'meis, so by tumas hameis she'ein mishalchin korban osein, that a bailim or tamei tumas hameis cannot be part of the Korban Pesach. Kohen shenitma b'meis enu din she'eino meratze, since certainly they should be unable to do the Korban Pesach. A kohen who's tamei tumas hameis should certainly be unable to do the avodah of the beit hamiqdash. If they do, it should be mechul. Kasar v'ziknei darim tamei meis nami mishaleach korban nosav. So actually, the ziknei darim hold that tamei meis, if you have a person who's tamei tumas hameis, it's a 7-day tumah, and let's say he's only on day 2, he's going to be tamei for another 5 days, he's for sure still going to be tamei, comes the afikomen that night. Say the ziknei darim actually hold that he also can participate in the Korban Pesach. He also can participate in the Korban Pesach. If he's part of a chabura and somebody else in the chabura is doing the shchita and the zrika and all that stuff, and he's not even going to eat it, he can't eat it. But still, he'll be yotzei his mitzvah of Korban Pesach. He won't have to do Pesach Sheni. It's b'diavad. I mean, he really needs to do Pesach Sheni, right? I mean, he's tamei tumas hameis. That you have an individual who's tamei tumas hameis. That's exactly the scenario where you do Pesach Sheni. But he didn't. He was part of a Korban Pesach. He won't have to do Pesach Sheni. He'll be yotzei the mitzvah. So actually, so therefore, this kal v'chomer, which was, if you have somebody who's tamei tumas sheretz, he could be part of the Korban Pesach, and yet a kohen who's tamei tumas sheretz cannot do the avoda. So we want to say, well, then certainly, so an individual who's tamei tumas hameis who cannot participate in the Korban Pesach, well, then certainly a kohen who's tamei tumas hameis should not be able to do that avoda. But the ziknei darim say, no, that's actually not true. Actually, we hold that a person who's tamei tumas hameis actually can b'diavad participate in a Korban Pesach. Really, he needs to bring the Pesach Sheni instead. That's exactly the scenario where you bring the Pesach Sheni. But if he was part of a chabura for a Korban Pesach, he will be yotzei, even though he's going to be unable to eat it because he is tamei. V'aksev ish kiyeh tamei v'aso Pesach b'chodesh hasheni v'gomer. But doesn't the pasuk say that when you're tamei tumas hameis, you do Pesach Sheni, not Pesach Rishon? Lemitzvah. That's saying, you're right. You need to. You really need to. But b'diavad, if a person was part of a chabura, even though he was tamei, he won't have to do Pesach Sheni. He's technically Yoziv Oksiv. Ish lefi ochlo. But it says, Ish lefi ochlo. Tachosu alaseh. Is that what it says? Yeah. Ish lefi ochlo. You have to eat it, right? He can't eat it. The mitzvah, again, l'chatchila, you have to be able to eat it. V'akuve lo, but it's not ma'akev. What do you mean? It just l'chatchila has to eat the Korban Pesach. You have to eat the Korban Pesach. You have to be able to eat the Korban Pesach. V'atanya, b'michsas nefashos, it says by Korban Pesach in the number of people that were counted on the Korban Pesach. You have to have a chabur, you have to have people counted as part of the Korban Pesach. The Korban Pesach can only be slaughtered for people that were already merosh, that were already in advance joined and counted as part of the Korban Pesach. Shochato shelo limnuyav yachuye over ala mitzvah. Wait, a vikosher. Okay, so is it? You have to add the word vikosher. So yachol, is it possible? Yeah, where am I? What about if you slaughter the Korban Pesach for people that were not counted on the sheep meirosh? Can you just be like, okay, fine, well, you didn't do the lechatchila, but b'diavad it's kosher. Is that possible? That the pasuk says, I'm going to read the pasuk. Yimat habayis mios misav lokachu shchenu akar el beiso b'michsas nefashos yichach v'achol tachosu alaseh. It has this michsas tachosu twice in the same pasuk. This the number of the people to double down and to say. Shanal of a kosav la'akev, to say, no, this is ma'akev, you have to do it. You have to be counted on the Korban Pesach in advance. The iskash ochlin lemnuyin. It says, ish lefi ochlo tachosu. That we're comparing ochlo to tachosu. We're comparing the eaters of the Korban Pesach to those who are counted. So therefore, just like you have to be counted on the Korban Pesach in advance, you also have to be able to eat it. So what's going on here with the Ziknei Darim saying that a tamei meis who's unable to eat the Korban Pesach because he's tamei tumas hameis can still technically be part of the Korban Pesach, and the eating thing is just the chatchila? No, just like being counted on the Korban Pesach is not just the chatchila, it's me'akev, so is being able to eat it. Ziknei Darim lo makshe. Well, the Ziknei Darim don't make this, they don't make this hekesh between eating and counting. And they say, well, yeah, you do have to be counted on the Korban Pesach. You don't necessarily have to be able to eat it. And therefore they would say that b'di'eved, a tamei meis would be able to be counted, to be able to be part of a Korban Pesach. But even so, you know what? Even so, fine. You know what? The Ziknei Darim, they don't compare eating and counting. They say, they want to say b'di'eved it could be included, but 1 second. But even if they don't compare ochlo and tachosu, but meha islu pircha, but you could still ask the following question: Uma b'makom shenitmu bailim b'sheretz shemeshalchen korban saying lichatchila. But still, a person who is tamei tumas sheretz can participate in the Korban Pesach lichatchila. A person who's tamei tumas hameis, according to the Ziknei Darim, who say that he can be included, it's still only b'di'eved l'chatchila. You have to do Pesach Sheni. That's obvious. That's for sure. Somebody's tamei tumas meis, of course he has to do Pesach Sheni. We're saying b'di'eved, if he was included in the Korban Pesach, they say it can work. So still, if we're comparing, right, if we think about the original kal v'chomer that was posed to the Ziknei Darim, they said, look, Ziknei Darim, you're saying that a kohen who's tamei tumas hameis is allowed, right? If he does the avodah in the beit hamiqdash, the avodah is kosher. And they said, but 1 second, if tumas sheretz, which can be included in the Korban Pesach, and yet a kohen is tamei tumas sheretz, the avodah is possible. By tumas hameis, where you can't be included in the Korban Pesach, certainly the avodah of the kohen tamei tumas hameis should be possible. So they said, actually, tamei tumas hameis can be included in the Korban Pesach. But you know what? It's still only b'di'eved. So let's just tweak that same question. Let's just tweak it slightly, and then we got them where it hurts. And that slight tweak is, well, if by tamei sheretz, where somebody who's tamei tumas sheretz can be included and part of the Korban Pesach, even lichatchila, and yet a kohen who's tamei tumas sheretz cannot do the avodah in the beit hamiqdash, and if he does, it's possible. Well, then certainly I would argue that by tumas hameis, where even if you want to say somebody who's tamei tumas hameis can be included in the korban pesach, but that's only b'di'evid. I would say that certainly if by tumas sheretz a kohen who does avodah b'tumas sheretz is possible, certainly then I would say that by a kohen who does avodah in beit hamiqdash b'tumas hameis should be possible as well. So again, right, so islu pircho mina uma b'makom she nitmu bailim b'sheretz shemshachnu kol masein lichatchila. If by tumas sheretz, where somebody who's talking tumas sheretz can be participate in the korban pesach even lichatchila, and yet kohen shenitma b'sheretz eino miratze. If a kohen is talking tumas sheretz, the avoda is mechulol, it's no good. So makom shenitmu bailim b'meis. If we're talking about tumas hameis, she'ein mishalchen korban masein lichatchila, that somebody who's talking tumas hameis, he cannot participate in a korban pesach lichatchila, only b'di'evid. So kohen shenitma b'beis eino din she'eino miratze. Certainly, then I would make the argument that a kohen who's talking tumas hameis should be unable to do the avoda in the beit hamiqdash. And if he does, it should be possible, just like the tumas ha-sheretz. And you can add the word kasha. It's taka, a question on the ziknei darim. It's taka, a question on the ziknei darim. It's taka, a good question on the ziknei darim. It's not like Gemara asks a kasha on the ziknei darim. Meis ve'eva kasha. Mipnei she'amru nazir ve'osa pesach atzitz miratze al tumas dam ve'ein atzitz miratze al tumas haguf. Chevra, what is this? What is this talking about? So this is taka, an excerpt from a Mishnah in Masechta Pesachim. So let's taka read this Mishnah in. I have this Mishnah in Masechta Pesachim right here. I'm going to read it. HaPesach shenizu akdamo. I'm reading it outside from the Mishnah in Masechta Pesachim. HaPesach shenizu akdamo v'achar kach nodu shu tamei hatzitz miratze. So if you have a korban pesach that the blood of the korban pesach was already zrikas adam, and then it turns out that the blood or the meat became tamei, okay, the tzitz miratze, like we talked about, that the tzitz is miratze for tumas hakodshim. So no problem. The blood became tamei after shchita, or the meat. It's okay. The tzitz is miratze. However, friends, nitma haguf. But if what it turns out was that the bailim, the person offering the korban pesach, it turns out that he was tamei. Okay, so this is already becoming relevant. We're talking about tamei tumas asher. It's talking about tamei tumas hameis. Ain't that tzitz miratze? So guess what? The tzitz is not going to be miratze, and he's going to be unable to bring the korban. The korban is going to be possible. The korban is going to be, he's going to have to do Pesach Sheni. Mipnei she'amru, and this is what our Gemara is saying, Mipnei she'amru, because they said, ha-nazir v'ose Pesach, when it comes to a nazir and ose Pesach, we just are talking about nazir also. Of course, a nazir is not allowed to be tamei meis, right? So if he brings his korbanos at the end of his naziris, and it turns out he was actually tamei meis, so the korbanos are no good. He's going to have to go back and wait 7 days, the whole thing. So another, atzitz miratze al tumas adam, ve'en atzitz miratze al tumas haguf. That when it comes to a nazir, and when it comes to a korban pesach, we say that the tzitz can be miratze for tumah that happens to the blood or to the meat, but not tumah that happens to the person. Okay, so this is what our Mishnah is. So now back in our Gemara, we have a kasha on the ziknei darim. The kasha is from the Mishnah that we just learned in Masechta Pesachim. Mipnei she'amru, because they said nazir v'ose pesach. When it comes to a nazir, when it comes to ose pesach, hatzitz miratze al tumas dam. So sure, the tzitz can be miratze if the blood, or I think the meat too. Let's just say the blood. Fine, that's what it says. If the blood becomes tamei, right? So they slaughtered the korban pesach, and then somehow the blood became tamei. Okay, fine, no problem. The korban pesach is still okay. You can still eat it that night, no problem. The ein hatzitz miratze al tumas haguf, but the same will not be said about if the bailim of the korban pesach, if the person bringing the korban pesach himself became tamei We would not say that it is okay. B'mai, and what kind of tumah are we talking about? That it became tamei, and it's a problem by Korban Pesach. That the person became tamei, and it's a problem by Korban Pesach. We're saying, well, he became tamei, tumas sheretz. But I thought we said that that's not a problem. You can slaughter and do zukas adam for somebody who's tamei tumas sheretz, because by the time game time comes, afikomen o'clock, he'll already be tower by then. So that is fine. Ela tumas meis. Rather, it must be that the issue is that if it turns out that the bailim of the Korban Pesach was tamei tumas hameis, and therefore he will be unable to eat the Korban Pesach that night, because it's a 7-day tumah. So we're saying if it turns out that he's tamei tumas hameis, then he's not yotze the mitzvah of Korban Pesach. He's going to have to do Pesach Sheni. V'katani eina tzitz meratze. And we're saying that tzitz is not meratze. He's going to have to do Pesach Sheni. Alma nitmu bailim b'meis. That when it comes to tumas hameis, ein mishalchin korbanos saying they can't offer a korban Pesach. So the Ziknei Darim had said earlier at the bottom of Chav Beis Amud Beis that somebody who's tamei tumas hameis can still be included in the Korban Pesach b'di'evid. The chatchila you have to be able to eat it, but b'di'evid they could be yotze and they won't have to bring a Pesach Sheni. Yet over here we're quoting a Mishnah from Masechta Pesachim that's saying that if it turns out that he's tamei, and it sounds like we're saying turns out he's tamei tumas hameis, the tzitz is not meratze, he's in trouble, he's going to have to bring the Pesach Sheni. He can't, he's not going to be yotze the Pesach Rishon. So it's a kasha on the Ziknei Darim. We're saying that somebody who's tamei tumas hameis cannot do Korban Pesach bichlal. Lo. Idit mubaylim b'meis hachinami. So says the Anshe Darim, you think you know what that Mishnah is talking about? You don't. You have no clue what the Mishnah is talking about. The Mishnah is not talking about the bailim. The Mishnah is not saying that if the person or one of the people, or somebody who was counted on a Korban Pesach, and he's tamei tumas hameis, it is not saying that he's possible. He's gonna have to bring Pesach Sheni. It's not saying that. Hochov mayaskinon kigon shenitma kohen b'sheretz. No, you know who the person who's getting tamei is, and it's a problem by Korban Pesach is? The kohen. Of course, the big sheet of the Ziknei Darim that we've been handling with the whole daf so far has been that the Ziknei Darim said that when the Mishnah says that a kohen who's tamei, if he does avoid it, it's possible. It's dafka talking about a kohen who's tamei tumas sheretz, and that is precisely what the Mishnah in Pesachim is talking about. That if a Korban Pesach was offered, and it turns out, in retrospect, turns out after the fact, that the kohen who offered the korban was tamei tumas sheretz, the tzitz is not meratze, the Pesach is no good. That's what it's saying. But if it turns out that the bailim, that the owner was tamei tumas hameis, that's fine. But the very end of that same Mishnah, I stopped reading literally before these words. Nitma tumas hatehom hatzitz meratze. That however, if it's tumas hatehom, shish. Tumas hatehom, we must have learned about this in Masechta Pesachim. I don't remember it so much, but apparently, if there was a body was discovered somewhere deep underground. Where did I see this? I think maybe I saw it in a note in the art scroll. Like, for example, if like they discovered underneath an avalanche, like a corpse, nobody even knew it was there, like that kind of a thing. So if the and Rashi says that this is a suffix tumah. So now the Mishnah then continues and concludes, Nitma tumas hatehom, but if we're talking about tumas hatehom, if the tumah that we're talking about is tumas hatehom, the tumah of the depth, hatzitz miratze, the tzitz will be miratze. Okay, now remember, the Ziknei Darim had said that this Mishnah is talking about a kohen who became tamei with tumas sheretz, and he does the avoda, we're saying it's possible. But if it's tumas hatam, we're saying it's kosher. The thing is, Hatani Reb Chia taught lo amru tumas hatam ela lemeis bilvad. That the thing is that the Ziknei Darim had said that this was talking about a kohen who was tamei tumas sheretz, but the thing is that the Mishnah continues and it's talking about tumas hatam, and Reb Chia taught that when we talk about tumas hatam, we're talking about tumas hameis bilvad. So lemeis lemute mai la again lemeis lemute mai lav lemute tumas hatam de sheretz. No, if Reb Chia is saying that when it comes to tumas hatam, we're talking about tumas hatam of a mace, bilvad, only tumas hatam of a mace, well, that means that we're not talking about tumas hatam of a sheretz. So the Ziknei Darim wanted to say that who's the tamei person that is going to be possible by Korban Pesach? It's the kohen who's doing the avoda. He's tamei tumas sheretz, and therefore the avoda is mechul. The thing is, the Mishnah continues to talk about tumas hatam, and tumas hatam is talking about tumas hameis. It's not talking about tumas hasheretz. So we're not talking about tumas hasheretz. It's talking about tumas hameis. Lo lemute tumas hatam deziva. When we say that we're talking about tumas hasheretz bilvad, no. When we say that we're talking about tumas hameis bilvad, tumas tahom of a meis bilvad, it's the exclusion of tumas hatam of a zav. He's talking about a scenario where a person sees ziva and bein hashmashos. The question is, because by zav, by a man, it's about by a woman it's about seeing dam 3 days in a row. By man, it's seeing dam seeing ziva 3 times. The question is, if you see ziva during bein hashmashos, maybe you could divide it into 2. It's like you saw it once one day, a second time another day. It could be considered 2 separate seeings. Anyways, it's this kind of suffix ziva situation. Anyways, that is so when Reb Chia says that tumas hatam is dafka tumas hatam of a meis belvad to the exclusion of ziva, but not necessarily to the exclusion of tumas hasheretz. Okay, so therefore the Ziknei Darim would still argue that the Mishnah, when it's saying that if the person is possible, if there's tumas haguf, so then the Korban Pesach is no good, the tzitz is not meratzeh, they're going to stick to their guns and they're going to say it's talking about the kohen is tamei tumas hasheretz, and there's no problem with the fact that it then talks about tumas hatam. Okay, fine. Oh, but the Gemara goes deeper and says, Rami bar Chama asks a kasha, but the boy Rami bar Chama kohen amiratzeh b'korban osayim, that when it comes to a kohen who's doing the avoda, Hutralo tumas hatam, olo utralo tumas hatam. That the kohen who's being miratzeh the korban pesach is tumas hatam mutter to him or not? Well, according to the Ziknei Darim, if the Mishnah is talking about the kohen who's doing the avoda, and we're saying that Nitma tumas hatam hatzitz miratzeh, well then what's Rami bar Chama asking about? He's got his answer right there in the Mishnah. Whereas again, Rami bar Chama, that which Rami bar Chama asks, kohen amiratzeh b'korban osayim, if you have a kohen who's offering the korban pesach, hutralo, or I think also the korban nazir, hutralo tumas hatam, olo hutralo tumas hatam, is tumas hatam going to be mutter to the kohen or not? Tifsho to tumas hatam hutralo. That's the answer from this Mishnah. If the Ziknei Darim are correct, that this Mishnah is talking about the kohen, so Rami bar Chama should have his answer. Mutter. Because after all, according to the Ziknei Darim, this Mishnah is talking about the kohen. Rami bar Chama, look. Rami bar Chama definitely argues with. No, Rami bar Chama does not agree with the Ziknei Darim. Rami bar Chama holds that somebody who's tamei tumas hameis, Rami bar Chama disagrees with the Ziknei Darim. He says if a person who's tamei tumas hameis, he has to be korban. Yeah, he has to be pesach sheni. That's it. That's that. There's no being included in the Pesach Rishon. If you're Tamei Tumas Hameis, you have to bring Pesach Sheni. And therefore, he would explain that Mishnah that it's talking about the person, that Tumas Haguf, i.e., if the Bailim were Tamei Tumas Hameis, so then the tzitz is not Maratza, and you'd have to bring the Pesach Sheni. So he disagrees. Rabbi Bar Chama disagrees with the Ziknei Darim. Okay. Tashma coming here. V'nosa Aharon es oven hakochim. This is going to be a kasha on Roman Bar Chama. That the pasuk says that by the tzitz that Aharon will be nosei oven hakochim. That the tzitz essentially will be Maratza for oven hakochim. The question is, P'che'eze oven nosei. What is this oven hakochim that we're saying that the tzitz is Maratza for? Im oven pigul lo yikvanemer lo yichoshev no im oven noser yikvanemer lo yirotze. Can't be talking about pigul. It's not talking about if you have pigul, no problem, the tzitz is Maratza. It's not talking about noser, that the tzitz is Maratza for that either. Ha'inu nosei elo tuma shehutra michlala b'tzibur. Rather, the tzitz is Maratza for tuma that is permitted b'tzibur. My tuma, which tuma? Ilema tumas sheretz. If we're saying something about tumas sheretz, but heicha ishtari, where right, tumas sheretz is not mutter, right? We had said, right? For example, by Korban Pesach, we had said if when it comes to tumas hameis, so we said that an individual would do Pesach Sheni, and by right kol sheyachid nidche tzibur. What was the phrase? Kol sheyachid nidche tzibur avdei betuma. So we said by Korban Pesach that tumas hameis, an individual would do Pesach Sheni, but the tzibur, if it's the whole tzibur is tamei tumas hameis, they could offer the Korban Pesach betuma. But we didn't say that by a sheretz. By sheretz, you would offer it, right? You would be included, and that night you would. By the time it comes to Afikoma, you already be tor. So again, so what is this Tumah Mishurchu Mechlal B'tzibur? My Tumah, Ilem Tumas Sheretz. If we're talking about Tumas Sheretz, Heicha Ishtrei. There's no indication that Tumas Sheretz is Mutter B'tzibur, since a person who's Tamei Tumas Sheretz would not do Pesach Sheni. So the Tzibur also, it would not be Hutra B'tzibur. So Elo Tumas Meis. So what's the Tumas Shehutra B'tzibur? Tumas HaMeis. That if the majority of Am Yisrael is Tamei Tumas Hameis, so they would bring the Korban Pesach B'tumah. So V'lav Kigonin, are we not talking about Shenitmu Bailim B'meis? Are we not talking about where the owner of the participant in the Korban Pesach became Tamei Tumas Hameis, and we're saying that since Tumas Hameis is a Tumah that is Hutra B'tzibur, so therefore even when the owner is Tamei Tumas Hameis, the tzitz is Maratza and allows the owner who's Tamei Tumas Hameis to technically b'diavad be included in the Korban Pesach. Nitmu Bailim B'meis Mishachan Korban Osein. So like the Ziknei Darim say, unlike Rami Bar Chama says, an individual who became Tamei Tumas Hameis should be able to participate in the Korban Pesach, and the tzitz will be Maratza for Tumas Shehutra Mechlal B'tzibur, i.e. Tumas Hameis. Uvimai, and what are we talking about? Ibn Nazir v'chiyamus meis olav amar Rachmana. You can't be talking about a Nazir. Nazir, that's kind of the whole thing. So you have a Nazir, it becomes the pasuk says, you have a Nazir, he becomes Tamei Tumas Hameis, he's got to start all over again. Certainly if he brought his korbanos, it would not be good. He's got to wait 7 days, bring different korbanos and start over, and then if it's, let's say, a 30-day Nazir, so a Nazir for 30 days, and there's no chance that a Nazir who is Tamei Tumas Hameis the tzitz is going to be Maratza for that. No, he's got to start all over again. So La'ose Pesach. So rather, we're asking against Rami Bar Chama. Let's say that what is this Tumah Shutru B'tzibur? That the tzitz is Maratza. It's talking about by Korban Pesach. If the Bailim become Tamei Tumas Hameis by Korban Pesach, the tzitz will be Maratza, and they can be included in the Korban Pesach. They won't have to bring Pesach Sheni. Like the Ziknei Darim, unlike Rami Bar Chama would answer La'olam B'sheretz, that actually we are talking about Tumas Sheretz. Okay, but we said, but Tumas Sheretz is not Hutra B'chlal B'tzibur. The shame Tumah Ba'olam. No, what it's saying is that the tzitz is meratzeh for tumas sheretz. It's because of the tzitz being meratzeh that's what allows somebody who's tamei tumas sheretz to be included in a korban pesach. And what's the whole b'chol? Since tuma is something that there is a concept of being mutter bitzibur, being mutter, i.e. bitzibur. So since tuma is something that conceptually can be mutter, i.e. bitzibur, so also the tzitz could be meratzeh for tuma. Which tuma? Tumas hasheretz. I.e., if a person is tamei tumas hasheretz, he could be included in a korban pesach. But Ram Bar Chama would say that somebody who's tamei tumas hameis, forget about it. No, he has to bring pesach shein. V'ika dedaike u'maisiyachiv. There are those who actually learn it like this, not as a question on Ram Bar Chama, but rather as a question on the Ziknei Darim. Ovon HaKodshim in Ovon Makdishin lo. That when it says that the tzitz is meratzeh for Ovon HaKodshim, right? When the pasuk says V'nosa Aharon is Ovon HaKodshim, the Ovon HaKodshim, we're talking about the tzitz being meratzeh for the actual animal that became tamei, not for the people that become tamei. If the people become tamei, it's not going to be mechaper. It's not going to fix that. So what tumah are we talking about that the korban became tamei with this kind of tumah? We're saying that tzitz is meratzeh. Tumas sheretz. If we're talking about tumas sheretz, that the korban became tamei with tumas sheretz, we're saying that tzitz is meratzeh. But mi ishtayir b'tzibur, we had said though that we're talking about tumah which is mutter b'tzibur, but tumas sheretz isn't mutter b'tzibur. Elav tumas meis. Rather, must be talking about tumas meis, because tumas meis is mutter b'tzibur. V'avon kodshim in, avon makdishim lo. But we're saying davka, a korban that became tamei from tumas hameis. But the makdishim, whether we're talking about the bailim, whether we're talking about the kohanim, if they are tamei tumas hameis, then it would not be good. So la'olam tumas sheretz. No, really, what we're talking about is tumas sheretz v'shem tumah ba'olam. No, we're talking about if the korban became tamei with tumas sheretz, the tzitz is meratz, and even though tumas sheretz is not mutter bitzibur, but tumah in general is something that's mutter bitzibur, and therefore we're saying that the tzitz is meratzeh for tumas sheretz by kodshim, since conceptually tumah is something that anyways could be mutter, i.e. bitzibur. But the Ziknei Darim would argue though that in terms of if somebody who's tamei, can he be included in the korban pesach? Yes, he can, because that whole thing of the kodshim in makdishim lo, that's by tumas sheretz. It's not by tumas hameis. And now we finally get to the second section of today's Gemara, which is Daf Chav Gimel Masechtas Zevachim, which is almost funny to say because 95% of this daf is the first section. And now we're just going to quickly wrap up. Yoshev, when it comes to a kohen who is sitting in the azara, a kohen who's sitting, if he does the avoda is psula, is mechulal. Minal, and how do we know this? Amar Rava says, Rav Nachman, Amar Kra, lamoid l'sharis. He has to be standing to serve. Lamida b'chartiv, I chose the kohen to stand. V'lo l'yeshiva, not to sit. If he's sitting, I didn't choose him. He's a zar, and zarim, of course, we know, if they do avoda, it's mechulul. Tana one of the Abisad, lamod l'shar is mitzvah. It says to stand to serve. That's lechatchila. Shu omer ha'omdim. When two psukim later it says ha'omdim shana alav ha'kosav le'akev. The pasuk doubled down to say no. This isn't just lechatchila. This is me'akev. You gotta do it. Omer le'Rav Rav Nachman says Rav Nachman mirdei. Let's say Yoshev kizar dami. If we're saying that somebody who's sitting, a kohen who's sitting, he may as well be a zar. So umachil avoda is machal avoda. Eima mazar b'misa ap Yoshev b'misa. I'll say, well, just like a zar who does the avoda is chayiv misa. So also somebody who sits while he's doing the avoda is chayiv misa. But Allah metanya. Why do we learn in a brayso? Aval orel onen Yoshev, in orel in onen or a Yoshev, somebody who's sitting, einon b'misa. They're not chayiv misa. Elabasar, it's only a lav. Because mechusar begadin, which we learned about, and lo rachutz yadayim v'raglayim, which we also learned about, and you're chayiv misa if you do those things. If you serve Those are right. We've in those two places it says that the chayiv misa, so it's specifically those two places, not other places. We've seen this concept before, that whenever you have two psukim, right, something written specifically in two places, it's limited to those two places. And even according to the opinion who says that when something is written in two places, it still can be extrapolated to other places. Shlishi v'shlosha l'divrei hakol imlamdin. However, the Shesuya Yayin, which would create the trifecta, right? Those were all learned together, right? Chuka, chuka, chuka. It says chuka by all of them, right? Mechusa begadim, she'eno, what was it called? She'eno rachus yadayim raglaim, and Shesuya Yayin. In all three of those places, it says that they're at the Bichayiv Misa. So even if you don't hold of Shnei Ksuvan Abayin Ke'echadim Melamdin, you would hold of Shlosha Ksuvan Abayin Ke'echadim Melamdin. And therefore, it would not be applied to Yoshev. Yoshev would not be Chayiv Misa. Chevre, that was Daf Chof Gimel of Masechta Zevachim. So I had said that really 95% of Daf Chof Gimel was the first section. In retrospect, it's probably more like 99% was the first section. A tamei kohen working in the base hamiqdash, we said is machal the avodah. The question was in what context. So the Ziknei Darim said that this is specifically sheretz tuma. If you have a kohen who's tamei tumas sheretz and he does avodah in the base hamiqdash, the avodah is mechulol. It's no good. But if he's tamei tumas hamei, since it's sutra b'tzibur, the tzitz is going to be meratzeh for that. That was the opinion of the Ziknei Darim. We had all sorts, then that kind of went through to all sorts of directions and kavachomers and stuff like that, and it led to places like, well, what would they say about somebody who's tamei tumas hamei bringing a korban pesach, because there were kavachomers that were asked based on that. It got into all sorts of stuff, but ultimately they managed to stick to their opinion. We even had questions on them that, however, that specifically a kohen who's tamei tumas hasheretz is going to be mechal de avoda. However, then you had opinions like Rami Bar Chama, who I think he would be saying even corpse tumah, right? I mean, you have opinion, for example, Rami Bar Chama, who says that somebody who is tamei tumas hamei cannot participate in the korban pesach, and if he can't participate in the korban pesach, well, then you could make the argument if he can't participate in the korban pesach, then a individual kohen shouldn't be able to do the. If an individual kohen does the avodah in beit hamiqdash, it should be mechulel. It should not work. You can argue that. Didn't say that explicitly. I think you can argue that according to Rami Bar Chama. Meaning, yeah, he's definitely arguing about the fact that somebody who's tamei tumas hamei cannot be included in the korban pesach without being pesach sheni. But I think you can even take it a step further, possibly, and say that that would also mean that a kohen who's tamei tumas hamei should be unable to do the avodah in beit hamiqdash, and it would be mechulel if he does. And then a sitting kohen working in the beit hamiqdash, not allowed. And if he does, it is mechulol. Chevre, that was Daf Chof Gimel of Masechta Zevachim. I hope you enjoyed. Cheers.